So now moving on to an introduction to Baharieh, whose face you've already been able to see for about a minute or two. Baharieh is one of the most amazing women that I have had the honor and privilege of meeting. She was raised in Iran, studied Persian literature at the University of Shiraz, and then in 1960 she pioneered to Kenya. She was there for 11 years, raising a daughter, and then in 1971 moved on to the Baha'i World Center, where she was a staff serving in various capacities for 38 years, including and sometimes as a secretary aide to members of the House of Justice. She has published several books and many articles on the status of women in religion and on other topics, including the Kitabi Akdas, which work she co-authored with her daughter. So she's quite a capable researcher and author and translator, and we're very much looking forward to hear her today. Baharieh, welcome to this Wilmette Institute web talk. We're delighted to have you, and we're now looking forward to seeing your presentation.
Thank you very much, Rob, for your introduction. I hope I'll be able to live up to it. And to the invisible audience, warm greetings. Women of Consequence in the Life of the Bab is the title of this webinar. And it's important for me to say how religious history has fascinated me from the early years of my life. That fascination led me to the Dawnbreakers. I read the Persian translation of the book in the summer of the year I graduated from primary school. As I was reading the book, I was making notes of the women mentioned by name in this voluminous history book of our faith. A few I found, and that saddened me for the plight of womankind. I was expecting to see more. But as I grew older, I realized that the time tradition practices of in the Middle East had prevented women from participating in what history recognizes as historical event. Nevertheless, I hoped I would be able to see more. When I saw a statement by Abdul-Baha, which you will see in this slide, he says, every influential undertaking of the human world wherein woman has been a participant has attained importance. This is historically true and beyond this proof, even in religion. This statement gave me a new perspective to reread the Dawnbreakers and make notes of nameless women whose contribution to influential undertaking, although undeniable, had gone unrecorded or marginally reported. The focus of this webinar today are three women closely related to the Bab. The first of them is Fátimih Bagum, the mother of the Bab. We know almost nothing of Fátimih Bagum's life before she married Sayyid Muhammad Reza. We also know that before the Bab was born, the couple had two children who had died at birth or infancy. So the birth of Sayyid Ali Muhammad, who later became known as the Bab, was an extremely joyous event in the life of the couple. Unfortunately, after 6 or 7 years, tragedy struck and Sayyid Muhammad Reza passed away. With the death of Sayyid Muhammad Reza, Fátimih Bagum's responsibilities for raising a child as a single parent was much more important to attend to than if the father was alive. The society in which the Bab grew up had little regard for the role women played in their children's care. In accordance with Islamic practice, it was necessary in the absence of the father that a man, preferably a male relative, act as the legal guardian of the underaged, fatherless child. The person who had the honor and accepted the responsibility to be the legal guardian was Haji Sayyid Ali, Fátimih Bagum's brother. What is important to emphasize is that with the appointment of a legal guardian, Fátimih Bagum did not relinquish her responsibilities to raise her own son. Unfortunately, sometimes we read that after the Bab's father passed away, he was raised by his uncle. And I think it's only fair to include the mother at least as the main person who continued to raise her son. When the Bab was 15, he moved to Bushehr, where his uncles had a trading business. And then after a few years in Bushehr, he moved to Karbala, where he attended, we know sometime, the classes of Sayyid Kazem Rashti. He liked to stay in Karbala, and his mother was concerned. He wanted him to return to Shiraz, get married, and settle down. She even pleaded with her brother and some other friends to encourage the Bab to return to Shiraz. For the sake of his mother, we know that he did, and he married the cousin of his mother, Khadijih Bagum. When the Bab was 25 years old, he declared that he was the promised Qa'im. And that declaration, you can imagine in that kind of society, closed society with infinite prejudices, they arose against him and they demanded that he be put to death for the declaration he had made. At 31, the Bab was executed after 6 years ministry. But going back to what happened in Shiraz, he was, after he declared his mission, he went to Mecca for pilgrimage, and there he made a proclamation that he was the promised Qa'im. And as he was returning to Shiraz, the people that the governor of Fars had sent to arrest him and bring him back to Shiraz, met him on his way back to Shiraz, and as we read in history books, he offered himself and they took him back to Shiraz, and rumors were rife that he was going to be put to death. This is where the women got busy working to rescue the Bab from the plight that the enemies had set for him. Three women were involved in this attempt. One of them was Fátimih Bagum, the mother of the Bab. The other was Zahra Bagum, the sister of Khadijih Bagum, the wife of the Bab. And a third one, they met with the Imam Jum'eh, or through some means managed to get his attention that he had to save the life of the Bab. The mother of the Bab, even though she was aware of the sufferings that the Bab was going through, had no information, had no inclination that the Bab was actually the promised one. The Bab himself didn't inform her, and he also advised his wife not to tell his mother anything about his mission. So when he was executed, the suffering she underwent, not knowing the exact reason for it, was all the more hard to bear. We know that the Bab wished for his mother to recognize his station. And I'm going to show you this slide, which shows what he says in the Qayyum al-Asma about his regard for his mother and his wish for her to recognize his station. He says, "O thou mother of the remembrance." The remembrance, the great remembrance, is one of the titles of the Bab. "O thou mother of the remembrance, may the peace and salutation of God rest upon thee. Indeed, thou hast endured patiently in him who is the sublime self of God. Recognize then the station of thy Son, who is none other than the mighty word of God. He had verily pledged himself to be answerable for thee, both in thy grave and on the judgment day, while thou hast in the preserved tablet of God been immortalized as the mother of the faithful by the pen of his remembrance." You have the reference at the bottom of the slide. The Bab held his mother in high regard, respected her wishes, acknowledged tribulations she endured by virtue of being the mother of the primal point. The Bab did everything in his power to alleviate her sufferings, to ensure her well-being. Excuse me, I apologize for my voice. As indicated earlier, before his marriage, when he was in Iraq unwilling to leave the holy cities, he agreed to return to Shiraz for the sake of his mother, for him who wished for him to get married and settle down. After marriage, when he decided to join the company of the pilgrims of Fars, who were preparing to leave Shiraz for Mecca and Medina, he entrusted his wife to his mother and committed them both to the care and protection of his maternal uncle. This is according to the Dawnbreakers. While away, the Bab communicated regularly with his mother and his wife, the two women of utmost consequence in his life. We know this from the letters that have survived. In a letter he wrote from Mocha on his way to Mecca, he says, after the opening line, this is a letter written from the port of Mocha to the Honorable Mother. May God the Most Exalted keep her safe. She is most certainly eager to know about the well-being of her son. A letter was sent from Boucher. I trust God the Most High that it hath been illumined with the honor of thy perusal. See the language in which he speaks, the way that he addresses his mother. It's amazing. He says, I explained in the letter sent from Boucher the details up to Muscat. Surely it hath been conveyed to thy noble presence. Praised be God. My health until this day that I arrived in Mocha had been good, and there had been no change in my condition. With assistance from God, exalted be he, soon I shall reach the spot where prayers are answered. I will most certainly pray on thy behalf and on behalf of Honorable Grandmother. To the sister of Agha Mirza Sayyid Hassan, surely the letter I sent from Muscat hath been received, and she will also peruse this page. Peace be upon thee and God's mercy and his blessings. The reference to the sister of Agha Mirza Sayyid Hassan is actually to his wife, Khadijih Bagum. That is the style that they used in those days. Instead of naming the person, they described her relation to a male relative, which in case is her brother. The Bab's pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina and the proclamation of his mission, as I said earlier, provided his opponents with pretexts to demand action to end the spread of his influence. And I also mentioned about the women who got together, in a way networked, in order to get the Imam Jum'ah to do something to spare the life of the Bab. Now, one may wonder how it was that women who were generally invisible, regarded weak, in need of a male to manage their affairs, were at the same time so powerful and persuasive that they were able to influence such an important person as the Imam Jum'ah. That is a subject for another session, because today we are focusing on the lives of the mother, the wife, and the sister of the wife of the Bab. When the Bab was released on condition that he does not meet with anyone except for his wife, his mother, and his uncles, the people of Shiraz, at the head of them was the governor, who was a sworn enemy of the Bab. They were looking for excuses to find something in order to rearrest him. So one night, the constable, the Darughe of Shiraz, the mayor of the Shiraz, with his sergeants at arms, climbed up through the roof of a neighbor's house to the roof of the Bab's house and entered the house. We have an account of that event by Khadijih Bagum herself. She says, we slept on the roof. It wasn't uncommon. I was raised in Shiraz. I know that sleeping on the roof because of the heat of the summer, it was quite common. So she says, we slept on the roof and my mother-in-law slept in the courtyard. Farashes of the governor made their way to our home from a neighbor's roof. That blessed being rose up and told me to go downstairs. The intruders took away every book and every piece of writing that they found in the upper chamber. To him they said, you have to come with us to the house of Abdul Hamid Khan, the Darughe, the mayor. God knows what his mother and I suffered that night. We were thankful that his grandmother, an elderly lady, was not there. Shortly after that incident, according to a letter from Khadijih Bagum's younger brother, the authorities arrested the Bab and detained him under lock and key in the house of the same mayor. And it was rumored in the city that he would be put to death in the same house. Now, this time, there was another intervention which spared the life of the Bab. As the Darughe was taking the Bab to his house, there was a change in the mood among the people of the city. A cholera outbreak struck panic among the population, changing the authorities' focus from killing the Bab to averting an all-out calamity. The governor fled the city. The Darughe, more concerned with the survival of his children hit by cholera, managed to convince the governor to spare the life of the Bab. The Darughe obviously realized the outbreak had something to do with the arrest of the Bab, with the intention of putting him to death. The governor agreed on condition that the Bab leave Shiraz, never to return thereto. Khadijih Bagum says, one day, to our indescribable joy, he came home and stayed 2 or 3 days. These were the last days of my life with him. A few days before the arrival of the month of Ramadan, he announced that his sojourn in Shiraz was no longer advisable and that he would leave the city that very night. We, who had known how much he had suffered in Shiraz, were happy and contented that he could now reach a place of safety. According to Nabil, before the Bab departed Shiraz, he entrusted both his mother and his wife to the care of his uncle. He was the only male member of the family who had accepted responsibility and continued to do so. And the Bab charged his uncle to convey to each the expression, to each I mean his wife and his mother, to convey to them the expression of his affection and the assurance of God's unfailing assistance. Wherever they may be, he told his uncle, as he bade him farewell, God's all-encompassing love and protection will surround them. This is from the Dawnbreakers, page 198. The Bab left Shiraz for Isfahan in the last days of September 1846. Little is known about his mother and his wife and how they coped with the pangs of separation and what they did after the Bab departed Shiraz. It was some time before the news of his safety reached them. The youngest maternal uncle, who lived in Yazd, would every now and then send the news he had received to Shiraz with a messenger so that his wife and mother, the Bab's wife and mother, would be informed. Then we know that from Isfahan, the Bab was sent to Azerbaijan. The mother of the Bab was restless. She wanted something to be done. So she pleaded with her brother to do something. The brother, Haji Sayyid Ali, took a trip to Azerbaijan and met the Bab actually in Azerbaijan. But before he returned to Shiraz, he decided to stay for a while in Tehran. During that time, disturbances broke out and a number of Babis were arrested. One of them was Haji Sayyid Ali. 7 of them were put to death, and he was one of them. So before he could return to Shiraz and inform his sister and wife, the Bab's sister and wife and other members of the family, he himself lost his life. After Haji Sayyid Ali was martyred, the news of his martyrdom was not shared with the women members of the family. The devastating news was finally conveyed to the women when it became abundantly clear that something bad had happened. We know that after Haji Sayyid Ali was martyred, the Bab himself was executed in Tabriz. That news also was not disclosed to the women. Only when the son of Haji Sayyid Ali, who had gone on pilgrimage to Mecca with his father-in-law, died on the way back, and the father-in-law, excuse me, and the father-in-law, who happened to be actually the younger brother of Khadijih Bagum, had to return to Shiraz without his son-in-law. And then it became obvious that his death was a certainty. So the men decided to disclose the death of the young Jawad, about the martyrdom of the Bab, and about the martyrdom of his guardian uncle, all at the same time. I'm not going to go into detail why in those days men found it necessary to keep bad news from women. In this case, in any case, they had to it was disclosed in a most dramatic way. And poor Fátimih Bagum suddenly realized that the castle of false hopes she had built for so long was coming down, crashing down, and the weight of anguish that she suffered was tremendous. She was also the one at whom finger of blame was pointed. Everybody, those who did not believe in the Bab, who had not recognized his station, naturally, they blamed Fátimih Bagum that her son had been the cause of all the problems the family was going through. Her suffering reached a point that she could no longer bear it. So she decided to leave Shiraz and Iran. First, she thought she would go to Mashhad, a holy city in Iran, but then realized that the farther she would go, the better it would be. So she went to Karbala and took Haji Mubarak, the Bab's faithful Ethiopian servant, with her. Moving to Iraq provided Fátimih Bagum with a priceless opportunity. The close proximity of Baghdad, which was Baha'u'llah's first place of exile, to the place of Fátimih Bagum's residence, made contact between her and Baha'u'llah's companions possible. Sometime after his return from Sulaymaniyeh, Kurdistan, a meeting took place between the mother of the Bab and a delegation that Baha'u'llah had sent with a specific mission. Nabil says she was living in Iraq, that's Fátimih Bagum, where she hoped to spend the remaining days of her life, when Baha'u'llah instructed two of his devoted followers, Haji Sayyid Jawad Karbala'i and the wife of Haji Abdul Majid Shirazi, both of whom were already intimately acquainted with her, to instruct her in the principles of the faith. Fátimih Bagum acknowledged the truth of the cause and remained until the closing years of the 13th century after Hijrah, when she departed this life, fully aware of the bountiful gifts which the Almighty had chosen to confer upon her. So finally, what the Bab had wished for her early on was materialized. Fátimih Bagum spent the rest of her life in Iraq. The exact date of her passing is unknown. No information is available about the last days of her life or the cause of her death. The exact place of the interment of her remains will be made public at an appropriate time in the future. Baha'u'llah has bestowed upon Fátimih Bagum the title Khairun Nisa. He says, O people, know ye that we have singled out for special favor the mother of the primal point, who had been mentioned before the throne as the most virtuous of all handmaids. The use of the title for aught beside her had been forbidden. Thus had it been revealed by the pen of the Most High in the tablet of decree, which is preserved in the inviolable treasury of thy Lord. She is indeed the Khairun Nisa. After her, it will be applied to the wife of the point, who had not set foot beyond the fortress of chastity. So we will see Khairun Nisa was conferred upon Fátimih Bagum, and after her, Baha'u'lláh said no one could be called by that name except Khadijih Bagum. Unfortunately, something is blocking a part of the quotation, and I cannot read it in full. I hope the audience can see it. And the reference is also there. Okay, I will now move on to Khadijih Bagum, the wife of the Bab. Of the two most consequential women in the life of the Bab, Khadijih Bagum stands out for recognizing his station at a time no one else was aware of it, and for embracing his cause before the declaration of his mission. She beheld without prior intimation an extraordinary visage that led to her early recognition of the Bab's glorious station. She saw her husband immersed in light in the upper chamber of their house. And we have again his recollections recorded by close members of her family. And I'm going to share it as a slide. It says, there she saw that world illuminating sun and light shedding moon standing in the middle of the room with his hands raised heavenward, while her eyes were fixed upon the dazzling light emanating from his being. A feeling of awe and fright came over her. She wanted to return, but was unable to move. Her awe grew to such intensity that she felt stupefied. At this point, his blessed person relieved her of her bewilderment by uttering the words, "Go back." He gave her new life and revived her faculties. She returned to bed, but could not sleep. I'm going to go to the next slide. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, but I'm trying to move the slides upwards so that, okay. Okay, I think it's the same slide. It says, when the breakfast table was spread and she went to the room of his mother, she saw she was still trembling and would not lift her head. The exalted being poured tea and offered it to her. He inquired, "What is the matter with you?" She replied, "What was the condition I saw you in?" The tongue of grandeur uttered such words that caused her anxiety to vanish and confirmed her in what she had seen. He spoke words such as these: "Know thou that the Almighty God is manifested in me. I am the one whose advent the people of Islam have expected for over 1,000 years. God has created me for a great cause, and you witness the divine revelation. Although I had not wished that you see me in that state, yet God had so willed that there may not be any place in your heart for doubt and hesitation." Wow. What an experience. The depth of the Bab's love and affection for Khadijah Bagum shines through the opening words of the first letter he wrote to Khadijah Bagum from Bushehr while on his way to Mecca for pilgrimage. That line has been translated by Mr. Balyuzi and quoted in the Bab, page 57. It says, "In the name of God, exalted is he. My sweet love, may God preserve thee. God is my witness that since the time of separation, sorrow has been so intense that it cannot be described." After the martyrdom of the Bab's uncle, Khadijah Bagum was the only member of his family fully aware and devoted to the Bab's cause. It was through her teaching efforts that her 13-year-old nephew, Mirza Agha, later known as Nuruddin, recognized the station of the Bab. Other Afghans entered under the shadow of the tree of the cause through the teaching efforts of these two members of the family, Khadijah Bagum and her nephew Mirza Agha. We learned earlier that Baha'u'lláh bestowed the title of Khairun Nisa, the most virtuous of all handmaids, on Fátimih Bagum. The only other woman honored with that title is Khadijah Bagum, and the part of the slide that I could not see to read to you is this. I'm sure you saw it on the slide that I showed earlier. It says, "By my life, the true one. She is the immaculate maiden," that is Khadijah Bagum. "She is the immaculate maiden, the consort of the Most High, the most chaste, the most chaste. Render her service, O my friends, with utmost sincerity, for she is the remnant of God amongst you, if ye are of those who truly understand. It's incumbent upon all to show respect to the consort of God. It's most desired to have consideration for her under all conditions." Now, about Khadijah Bagum's life before she married the Bab, we don't really know much except that she was the Bab's playmate. As children, they played together. and that she was a cousin of the Bab's mother. And there is a dream she had, a very vivid dream when she was very young, and the Bab was about 16 years old. Again, Mr. Balyuzi has put that in Khadijih Bagum to indicate the spiritual connection that existed between Khadijih Bagum and the Bab earlier on before he declared his mission. It says, when Sayyid Ali Muhammad had gone to Bushehr, Khadijih Bagum had a vivid dream in which she saw her young cousin in a verdant plain with flowers in profusion facing toward the Qibla, that's Mecca, in an attitude of prayer. He wore a labbade, an outer coat on which Quranic verses were embroidered with threads of gold. His face was radiant. The Bab married Khadijih Bagum in 1842. The fruit of that marriage was a son named Ahmad. He was born in 1843 and died shortly after his birth. The difficulties associated with his birth almost claimed Khadijih Bagum's life. Well aware of the depth of sorrow surging in her heart, in a chapter of Qayyum al-Asma, the Bab speaks tenderly of his marriage, bids Khadijih Bagum, his wife, to be patient in what God had decreed, and assures her of the glory ordained for Ahmad in the words of God. This is the passage. O concourse of light, hear my call from the point of fire in this ocean of snow-white water on this crimson earth. Verily, I am God besides whom there is no other God. On the exalted throne, a beloved noble woman, bearing the same name, that is Khadijah, as the beloved of the first friend, that is the Prophet Muhammad, the name of whose wife was also Khadijah, was wedded to this great remembrance. And verily, I caused the angels of heaven and the denizens of paradise on the day of the covenant to bear witness in truth to God's remembrance. Then addressing Khadijih Bagum, he says, O well-beloved, value highly the grace of the great remembrance, for it cometh from God, the loved one. Thou shalt not be a woman like other women, if thou obeyest God in the cause of truth, the greatest truth. Know thou the great bounty conferred upon thee by the Ancient of Days, and take pride in being the consort of the well-beloved, who is loved by God, the greatest. Sufficient unto thee is this glory, which cometh unto thee from God, the all-wise, the all-praised. Be patient in all that God hath ordained concerning the Bab and his family. Verily, thy son Ahmad is with Fátimih, the sublime, in the sanctified paradise. One of the distinguishing characteristics of Khadijih Bagum was her great capacity to know things that others could not bear to hear. It was due to this unique capacity that the Bab shared with her information regarding events that were to transpire and of their significance. He also advised her lovingly of the best way to deal with her woes and tribulations. According to Nabil, to her the Bab confided the secret of his future sufferings and unfolded to her eyes the significance of the events that were to transpire in his day. He bade her not to divulge this secret to his mother and counseled her to be patient and resigned to the will of God. He entrusted her with a special prayer revealed and written by himself, the reading of which he assured her would remove her difficulties and lighten the burden of her woes. In the hour of your perplexity, he directed her, recite this prayer ere you go to sleep. I myself will appear to you and will banish your anxiety. Faithful to his advice, every time she turned to him in prayer, the light of his unfailing guidance illumined her path, and resolved her problems. We learned earlier that Khadijih Bagum, that Fátimih Bagum, Khadijih Bagum's mother-in-law, left Shiraz and moved to Iraq. This had a great effect on Khadijih Bagum because after the Bab, she at least had her mother-in-law by her side. After Fátimih Bagum she left, Khadijih Bagum was deprived of this blessing. There is reason to believe that Fátimih Bagum at some point invited Khadijih Bagum to join her in Iraq. The reason for this is a tablet from Bahá'u'lláh in which he addresses Khadijih Bagum. I had a slide which unfortunately lost, and I have to read it to you. The tablet says to Khadijih Bagum, thou hast mentioned that the mother of Hazrat A'la, that is His Highness, the Exalted One, may the spirits of all except him be his sacrifice, wishes for thee to direct thy steps towards that land. This is most desirable. Shouldst thou decide to go, no harm would befall thee. I haven't found any information as to what happened, but we know for sure that Khadijih Bagum did not go to Iraq, Karbala, to join Fátimih Bagum. The most fascinating episode in Khadijih Bagum's life is her recognition of Baha'u'llah's station. When Janab Nabil was in Shiraz to announce Baha'u'llah's mission to the people of the Bayan, at Khadijih Bagum's request, he paid her a visit. Concerning that meeting, Khadijih Bagum says, I was behind a curtain, and as soon as I heard him, that is Nabil, say that the blessed beauty was he whom God shall manifest, promised in the Bayan, I experienced the same feeling as I had that night standing at the threshold of the upper chamber of our home, and became certain that what God had promised for the year 9 had come to pass. I immediately put my forehead on the ground in adoration and thanksgiving. Then I could only whisper, offer at his sacred threshold my most humble devotion. I did not hesitate for a moment, and my submission was instantaneous and total. Khadijah Bagum's recognition of Baha'u'llah's station gave her the inestimable honor and privilege of turning to him for the weighty decisions she had to make in life. we know that Munira Khanum, who became Abdul Baha's wife, on her way to the Holy Land, stopped in Shiraz and stayed with Khadijah Bagum. During that time, Khadijah Bagum asked Munira Khanum, when she attained Baha'u'llah's presence, to present 3 requests on her behalf. That's on Khadijah Bagum's behalf. The 3 requests have been recorded by Munira Khanum herself in her memoir, in her autobiography, and Mr. Balyuzi has translated and put them in Khadijah Bagum. The 3 requests are: she longed for the house of her husband to be repaired so that she might live there. Obviously, after the Bab's martyrdom, she could not go back to that house. And she wanted some changes to be made so that she could go and live there. The other one was for the hand of Furughiyeh Khanum, a daughter of Baha'u'lláh, on behalf of her nephew, Haji Sayyid Ali. She longed for people of Baha'u'llah's family and of the Bab's family to be united through this marriage. And the third one, she begged for permission to travel to Akka and have the bounty of attaining the presence of Baha'u'lláh, in whose path her husband had gladly offered his life. Baha'u'lláh granted all her wishes. One of these 3 requests became actually the cause of great anguish to Khadijah Bagum, and that was the marriage of Sayyid Ali to Baha'u'llah's daughter. Sayyid Ali had promised Khadijah Bagum to take her to Baha'u'llah's abode when he went to get married to Baha'u'llah's daughter. Unfortunately, the nephew did not fulfill his promise. He left with his family, with his parents and his sister, and after he reached the border, he sent a message to Khadijah Bagum that he could not take her on that trip and that he would try later to make arrangements for her to go and visit Baha'u'lláh. Khadijih Bagum, according to Janab Balyuzi, Khadijih Bagum was heartbroken. Her health deteriorated, and despite the attentions of several physicians, within 2 months of the receipt of that distressing intelligence, she passed away in the house of her glorious husband 3 hours before sunset on Monday, 2 Zilqa'dah 12, 1999, which translates to 15 September 1882. And strangely, the faithful servitor, Fezze, died 2 hours after the death of her mistress. The news of Khadijih Bagum's passing caused Baha'u'lláh immense sorrow. This was really what Khadijih Bagum was living for, to visit Baha'u'lláh. And that his nephew betrayed his promise and became the cause of his death, of her death, something so hard to reconcile with. Baha'u'lláh was well aware of the flimsy excuses used to deprive Khadijih Bagum of attaining his presence. And this is obvious from a tablet that he revealed saying how flimsy the excuses were. He says, would that the good pleasure of Her Highness the Exalted Leaf had been obtained. This would have been most loved and desired by the True One. Some efforts were made to arrange for another dependable person to accompany Khadijih Bagum to the Holy Land, but they did not bear fruit. Sayyid Ali Afnan never admitted his failure or apologized for what he had done to his aunt. He gave the impression that he intended to do the honorable thing and fulfill his promise, but self-interest and self-preservation caused him to fall miserably. The immensity of Khadijih Bagum's sufferings won her the station of a martyr. After she passed away, Baha'u'lláh acknowledged her as a martyr. This tablet is a testimony to that. It says, yet another favor for the blessed leaf revealed by God our Lord and the Lord of all who are in the heavens and earth, and then mentions the actual words of Baha'u'lláh. O servant in attendance, the heart of Bahá'u'lláh, the most exalted fruit, was verily consumed in the fire of separation. For that reason, before God, she is regarded as a martyr. The reward of this deed is the statement revealed by the pen of the Most High in the visitation prayer that on the night and day of her ascension, whoever passed away would be adorned with the vesture of forgiveness, except those who have openly denied the divine truth, his manifestation and his verses. She had been singled out for this favor. I don't know if anyone else among the prominent believers or members of the family have been given this honor that during the first 24 hours of her death, whoever passed away would be forgiven, except for those that deny God, his messengers, and his favored ones. The visitation prayers revealed by Baha'u'lláh in honor of Khadijih Bagum attest to the depth of his sorrow and grief and testify to her exalted station. Addressing her in one of the prayers, Baha'u'lláh says, O thou, the fruit of the divine low tree, the blessed and luminous leaf, the consort of the one through whose revelation the kingdom of immortality and the realm of creation were wreathed in smiles. I testify that thou art in truth the first leaf who attended the cup of a sure union and the last fruit who offered up her soul because of her separation from him. Thou art the one whose inner being was consumed, whose heart melted, and whose limbs were set aflame by reason of thy remoteness from the presence of the one whom God had made to be the dawning place of his signs, the dayspring of his proof, the manifestation of his names, the source of his laws, and the seat of his throne. I testify that in thee two signs have conjoined. The sign of union revived thee in the beginning, and the sign of separation encompassed thy death in the end. How many a night did thy sighs ascend because of thy love for God, and thy tears flow at the mention of his name, the most glorious. He had verily been with thee, witnessing thy burning, thy fervor, thine eagerness, thy yearning, and hearing the lamentation of thy heart and the wailing of thine inner being. Thus hath God singled thee out, O my leaf, for this most great bounty and this everlasting and preeminent station. Well is it with thee, with those who visit thee, with those who dwell in thy vicinity, with those who circle round thee, and with those who have besought and will continue to beseech God through thee. This is from Khandan Afnan by Muhammad Ali Faizi, translated and published in the Leaves, page 58. So hard to read this visitation prayer and not feel for the sorrows and sufferings of this great lady. The third woman that will be briefly covered is Zahra Bagum, the sister of Khadijih Bagum. Khadijih Bagum had two sisters, one half-sister who had married the guardian uncle of the Bab, and the full sister was Zahra Bagum. Zahra Bagum embraced the cause of the Bab through Khadijah Bagum and through her own son, Mirza Agha, whom Khadijah Bagum had taught. Zahra Bagum embraced the cause of the Bab, never wavered in her belief, and was Khadijah Bagum's staunch supporter and comforter to the end of her life. It was her son, Mirza Agha, who, through the teaching efforts of Khadijah Bagum, recognized the station of the Bab. He in turn taught the faith to his parents. This development made it possible for Khadijah Bagum to open her heart to them, share with them her experiences about perceiving at an early stage the glory of the Bab's station. Those recollections, the members of the family living in Shiraz, especially the son and grandchildren of Zahra Bagum, remembered and recorded for posterity. Zahra Bagum's deep devotion to the nascent faith and her unconditional love for Khadijah Bagum won Baha'u'llah's good pleasure, high praise, and commendation. In recognition of the services she rendered to Khadijah Bagum, Baha'u'lláh bestowed upon her the custodianship of the blessed house of the Bab after Khadijah Bagum's death. So Khadijah Bagum was the first custodian of the house of the Bab, and after her, Baha'u'lláh conferred this honor on her sister, Zahra Bagum. It was absolutely revolutionary for women to be custodians of such a highly exalted house. In a tablet revealed in his own hand and adorned with his seal, addressed to the men in charge of the affairs of the community in Shiraz, Baha'u'lláh confirms having bestowed the custodianship of the blessed house upon the wife of the primal point and her sister after Khadijah Bagum had passed away. He further emphasizes that the custodianship of the house had been granted by God through his bounty, reiterates that the decree had been adorned with his seal. You can see his seal on top of this tablet in a square. The name Baha'u'lláh appears, and that is one of Baha'u'llah's seals. That the sister and her offspring had been singled out for that honor and bounty, thus perpetuating her memory through ages and centuries. The house of the Bab has been ordained by Baha'u'lláh in the Kitab al-Aqdas as one of the two focal centers of pilgrimage in the Baha'i world. In the past, such exalted positions were reserved for men of high rank and stature. Even today, it's extraordinary for such honor to be bestowed upon a woman. How much more revolutionary it must have been in mid-19th century, when women throughout the world, particularly in the Middle East, were deprived of far less significant rights and honors and privileges. When Khadijah Bagum passed away, the custodianship of the house, including the right to reside there, belonged to Zahra Bagum, according to Baha'u'llah's firm decree. Zahra Bagum outlived Khadijah Bagum by 8 years. The two sisters were extremely close. Life after Khadijah Bagum must have been most difficult for Zahra Bagum, especially that her son and his family resided in Egypt for some time. She passed away in Shiraz in 1890, was buried next to Khadijih Bagum in the shrine of Shah Chiragh. She received several tablets from Baha'u'lláh, was also mentioned in tablets dealing with the custodianship of the house of the Bab. While Khadijih Bagum was alive, Zahra Bagum was addressed as Ukht Haram, meaning the sister of the honorable wife. After Khadijih Bagum passed away, Zahra Bagum was addressed as Afnan, the mother of the Afnan, a reference to her only son, Mirza Agha, later known as Nuruddin. Here I will end this webinar.
Thank you so much, Baharieh. This was really extraordinary. The details of the lives of these women, the significance of them, and the significance of what they were allowed to do and able to do, considering the culture and the times. Really, it's quite inspiring, quite moving, and I'm so glad that we were able to get this webinar arranged. I'm very grateful to you for providing this information. One thing I had not been aware of was that the Afnan were the uncles of the Bab on his mother's side. I had, for some reason, always assumed they were on his father's side, which of course is probably the sort of typical sexist thing one would expect. And that also strikes me as quite interesting and significant, that we're talking about a kind of matrilineal situation where it's the mother's side of the family that give us the Afnan. And I was wondering if you could elaborate further on this in terms of the brothers, for example, the various uncles of the Bab that of course, we hear so much about in the history books. If you could mention their names at least and their relationships to Fátimih Begum, which I guess they're her brothers.
Fátimih Begum had three brothers. One of them, Haji Sayyid Ali, the guardian uncle, the most prominent. The other one is Haji Sayyid Muhammad, who went to Iraq under the guise of visiting his sister, and he took his younger brother, I think it was Sayyid Hassan, and it anyway ended in visiting Baha'u'lláh and asking questions. Baha'u'lláh asked him to put them in writing, and the Kitab-e-Iqan was revealed in his honor, answering those questions. The Bab had also one cousin on his father's side, who would be also considered as an Afnan. I think he was killed at the instigation of Yahya Azad. But mostly the Afnans that we have and I know are related to Fátimih Begum through her brothers.
And Shoghi Effendi's father is one of those Afnan as well.
Yes. Yes, also I must mention that the brothers and the sister of Khadijih Bagum, they are also Afnans. So Afnans are related to the Bab through his mother and his wife.
So it's really quite a large number of people then, actually, who are considered part of that group.
Exactly.
That's very interesting. Thank you. There were various comments and questions that had come in earlier. Unfortunately, my internet connection failed me, and I had to log back in. And so I lost some of the things that Boyd had forwarded from Facebook, though I'm not sure if any of them were questions that we needed to receive right now.
I'll put them in again in here in a second.
Thanks, Boyd. Kay Ruthenham says, a wealth of knowledge, thank you. So that's the first of the various thanks that you've received. one person had asked the meaning of Khairul Nisa, and then you had given it the most virtuous of all women. So Paul was very grateful for that. And that really does strike me as quite a lofty title to give the Bab's mother, and of course eventually the Bab's wife as well, the most virtuous of all women. It strikes me as in some ways very much like the Virgin Mary in that sense, a kind of interesting parallel.
Yeah. He refers actually to Khadijih Bagum as the immaculate maiden, handmaid. So it really changes the definition of immaculacy, that we think it applies only in a certain way. And Baha'u'lláh testifies that Khadijih Bagum was an immaculate handmaid.
Some of these other questions that we've received since then. One person asked, where is the resting place of Fátimih Begum? Do we know which city? Is it
in Karbala or Najaf? And in the 10-year plan of Shoghi Effendi, it was a gold transfer. Her remains to the Baha'i cemetery, circumstances permitting. So I don't know if it happened or it's yet to happen. I'm sure the Universal House of Justice will announce when the time is right.
Yeah, when it's possible to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Bill asks, have you seen any indication that the next messenger might be a woman, or that future House of Justice members might be? This is an interesting and complicated issue, isn't it?
It is a complicated issue, and there is nothing that says women can't be manifestations of God. So, we have come so far now to have equality. God willing, in time we will have full equality. Still, we are struggling. And my hope is that if a woman appears as the next manifestation of God, people's mindset would have changed to the point of not making it impossible for her to survive. I'm sure when it's God's will, it happens. But anyway, this is one of those speculations that one tries not to get into, because it gets then even more complicated.
Considering how much the male manifestations have suffered, one wonders how much more a woman manifestation has to suffer as well.
Yeah. I try to prepare everybody, do your best to accept that it's a possibility at least. Then she won't suffer too much.
That's right. And we probably have had women as manifestations farther back in the past. There are various legendary figures in tribal societies, like the white buffalo calf woman in the Lakota tradition, who might represent a manifestation. We don't know. And it was much easier, I think, in these smaller societies where women had, I won't necessarily say equal roles with men, but the roles were often defined in much more flexible ways in smaller societies. So in many cases in these societies, women played sacred roles just like men did also. So who knows, perhaps it was an unfortunate phase of male chauvinism for a few thousand years that will be brought to an end soon.
Maybe they can rotate.
Yes. Which is probably also the possible solution for the House of Justice. First men, then women, then men, then women, rotate it.
I don't know, yeah.
It was interesting that Magdalene Carney once told me that she thought there was a great advantage to this, because if there's a man who is misbehaving in the world, looking like he's running for member of the House of Justice, they can't send a male counselor to counsel him, but they can send a woman counselor. So that this freed the women actually to serve in that role in ways that men couldn't serve, and that in the future there will only be women on the House of Justice, and men will then have to be able to do that. Who knows?
Yeah, I have heard so many outrageous speculations.
Yes.
Amazing.
Exactly. let me see. Sue Emmel says, we know so much about the contributions of men in the cause of God and so little about women, and yet we know we are equal to each other. So she's very grateful for this presentation and goes on. Might the appearance of the spirit in its male and female forms, men and women, be perceived as the feminine and the masculine aspects of God? Might the feminine aspect be considered the most hidden of the hidden, and the masculine aspect the most manifest of the manifest?
Yeah. Since God is not a physical being, all of these are things we attribute to him. Well, we try to understand, and the soul has no gender.
Yeah.
And neither does God.
Yeah.
So it's just what we have made of it. I'm sure when we are ready, it will all become apparent to us, as Abdul Baha says, as sun at high noon.
Yeah. Wendy says that she very much enjoyed your book, The Leaves of the Twin Divine Trees, and thanks you for that. Al Ria, I guess this person's name. I have a question about Tahareh's unveiling. Do you want to talk about that, or should we stick to the topic?
It depends what the
question
what she wants to know about Tahareh unveiling.
All right. Many people think that the unveiling meant Tahareh's hair was unveiled. This is probably not the case, because unveiling the hair is a recent thing. During Tahareh's time, it was very shocking to unveil the face, and showing the hair would be unthinkable. In God Passes By, Shoghi Effendi says, adorned yet unveiled. The word yet seems to suggest she had that her dress was adorned and that her face was only unveiled, removing only the ruband. Do you have any information, or do you have a personal conclusion about this?
I really don't, and we don't know the details. And in different sects of Islam, you see even today in Afghanistan, people cannot show even their eyes. They wear the burqa, and it's so strict. And in some other places, they argued that a woman's palms of hand could be shown and the face. And others said, no, all should be covered. I don't know why Islam has spent so much time and effort dealing with what should women hide and what they can reveal. I mean, honestly, with all the life threatening issues, hot issues that they could have discussed, it shows the importance of Tahareh's act of appearing unveiled. However she did it, it shocked her audience. And unfortunately, we don't have the details, and I haven't, and I really don't know, and haven't studied anything about that aspect.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course the wives of Muhammad present two contrasting examples for the Muslims, because Khadijih appeared without a veil. Before she even proposed to Muhammad. Mm-hmm. He didn't propose to her. She was a businesswoman. But then later on, after she passed away and he married many women for various political reasons and for protecting widows and such, and men kept whistling and oogling at them, he told them to cover up. So do you follow the example of Khadijih Bagum, or do you follow the example of the later wives? And this is something that a guardian of Islam could have helped resolve quite well, I think.
Yes.
Okay. Rebecca has a fascinating question. May I assume the wife and mother of the Bab were illiterate?
I have tried to figure it out. Haven't been able, because the Bab wrote letters to both. And usually it was the practice, if the person was illiterate, for a literate member of the family to read it to them. Now, I noticed in one of the tablets, the Bab says to his mother that he hopes she will peruse the same letter. But anyway, I really don't know. I haven't seen any specimen of their writing. And with regard to Khadijih Bagum, we know that his nephew and his niece recorded, the members of her family recorded her memoirs or her recollections. Most probably, if they were literate, they were maybe semi-literate.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't common for women to be literate in those days.
Right. Even women in wealthy families.
Some families, yes, they had means of providing for the women to become literate, like Tahir's family. Apparently, right. Tahir's mother herself was literate. We have poets, not many, but they wrote poetry. But most of the women that I have studied, we know Asiya Khanum was literate. We have specimen of her writing. Mm-hmm. But others, it's hard to know.
Even in New England, in the 18th century, literacy was not common among women. There were plenty of women who could read and write, but farm women in the 18th century, in 1700s in New England, did not go to school frequently. And I understand that it was when they decided that the girls should go to school as well as the boys. That's when they decided they needed women teachers because they could hire 2 women teachers for the price of 1 man. And they could then accommodate the girls as well as the boys. This is what I've heard. So the situation in Iran is not that different than the situation in the West, really.
Right. My own mother, we go only 1 generation back, she knew how to read and write. She knew how to read, but she couldn't write because they thought it wasn't good for a girl to be taught to write because she could get in relationships and through communication, written communication, and that was undesirable. My mother learned how to write later in life when I was a grown-up woman.
Yeah. And even Musa Banani was not literate, as I understand it.
That's right. He was maybe could sign his name, but that, yeah.
And of the cause of God.
The cause of God and a very successful businessman.
Indeed. There's a question here about Baha'u'lláh and Baha'u'llah's second wife and the question about Baha'u'llah's third wife as well. But before I ask that, I was wondering if you could say something about the Bab's second wife, who, of course, as we know, was treated terribly later in her life. And it's interesting that you didn't include her as one of the significant women in the Bab's life. So could you say about her?
When I was reading the tablet of Baha'u'lláh about conferring the title Khairun Nisa to the Bab's mother and then to his wife Khadijih Bagum, and he makes it very clear that this is the one who resides in Fars, who has not been touched by the hand of the betrayer, which the second wife. It makes it very clear that when people read the house of the wife of the primal point, he's not talking about the second wife. Right. Unfortunately, because I believe women did not have the right to make decisions about their future, the brothers got involved and they involved Yahya as well, who married her, and then his wives started complaining and he had to offer her up to Sayyid Muhammad Isfahani. It was very messy and the believers were very annoyed because in Islam, the wife of a prophet is off limit. Nobody should treat them, definitely not the way that Mirza Yahya Azal did and Sayyid Muhammad Isfahani. So unfortunately, I don't know how much she was responsible for what happened.
The second wife, yeah.
Exactly. But yeah.
And what do we know of the circumstances of the marriage for the second wife?
The circumstances were that when the Bab was in Isfahan, they wanted somebody, she moved to the house of the governor, and they wanted someone who would attend to the Bab. And it is an Islam, at least in Shia Islam, if a woman goes to a household to serve, they have to perform some kind of ceremony, read a sermon or something that provides for the possibility in case intercourse happens, right?
Conjugal relations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is all we know about the second wife. And she herself had, I have devoted a chapter in Leaves to the second wife and put whatever information I found about what happened. And somebody, a doctor, quotes, her name was Fátimih Khanum, that she really was there, and the Bab was busy reading and writing, and he dismissed her, and she went to her place, and the Bab, it's one of those things that according to Islamic law was necessary.
Right.
And it happened. Some kind of formality had to be observed.
Right. And I think we'll skip the questions about Baha'u'llah's wives for another time, since we're not focusing on that today. Sandy says she's unfamiliar with the book Leaves. Can you tell me how to get the book? Why don't you describe your book to Sandy?
Yeah. Okay, Sandy. Leaves of the Twin Divine Trees is the full name of the book. It's about prominent women related to the Bab and Baha'u'lláh. Most of them are faithful, prominent, wonderful women, but there are a few also who really broke the covenant. One of them is Baha'u'llah's eldest sister, for example. The Bab's second wife, Baha'u'llah's second and third wives. These are the ones who did not follow the Baha'u'llah's wish or the Bab's wish, and did things that put them outside the faith. Others are mothers of the Bab and Baha'u'lláh. Asiya Khanum, the wife, faithful wife of Baha'u'lláh. And Maryam, the Crimson Leaf, the Greatest Holy Leaf, Munira Khanum, the faithful sisters of Baha'u'lláh, like Sare Khanum. And there are about, I think, 12 different women of prominence closely related to the Bab and Baha'u'lláh who are covered in that book. It's published by George Ronald. It's available as, what do you call,
Online.
Online, yeah. There is a special term for it. Anyway, you can have the
Kindle.
Kindle, I think it's $10 if you get it on Kindle. And it's, I think, about $28 now if you order it through George Ronald or Baha'i Distribution Service. I think they have it, the Baha'i Distribution Service.
Yeah, and it's a magnificent book and quite lengthy, close to 400 pages. There's a lot to say about these women, and we are eternally grateful to you for having spent the time you spent, especially in and around your duties in Haifa for all those years, collecting the information, having access to the archival materials in some cases, and really putting together a magnificent account of the women of these two households, who otherwise their lives have been quite obscure, and now they're less obscure. And this is a very important contribution.
Thank you.
We have one question here from Jenny, a question about Tahereh's name. Did she go by Tahereh before Baha'u'llah bestowed that name on her at the Conference of Badasht? Or was she referred to by her given name Fátimih, then later given the name Tahereh, the Pure One?
Yeah. She had a number of names and titles, but the name Tahireh, that as you know in Badasht, was given to her and confirmed by the Bab. Baha'u'lláh gave her the name and the Bab confirmed it. I don't know when she wrote letter, for example, if she signed as Tahireh or as Qurratul Ain or as, Zarin Taj or I can't say. I have no way of knowing.
Right. That's, let's see. And Judith says, a great talk. Thank you very much. And there's apparently a question. We also have a question box. Let me see. These questions. Let me see if I can find. Baharieh Mitchell says, outstanding talk.
Oh, thank you, Baharieh John.
Are there records of Babis or Baha'is who passed away during the 24 hours surrounding the ascension of the wife of the Bab? I don't know how one would know that.
Yeah, obviously there weren't, records were not kept. Now families probably can go back and find out. Except for the woman Fezze, the faithful maidservant. That it's amazing that 2 hours after Khadijah Bagum passed away, this lady also passed away. So we know for sure that she benefited from that dispensation.
Indeed. Let's see. And then we have a comment about how the forced veiling of women may have more to do with the weakness of men and their inability to have a chaste eye than women. And that's certainly, Evely is certainly right about that. It's the culture has not been kind to men that way in terms of encouraging all kinds of inappropriate behavior. Mm-hmm. And Evely also says, thank you for this informative, wonderful, and beautiful presentation. And I think that's probably a good spot to end our session today, which is pretty much all of our questions. This has been really delightful. Baharieh, we're very grateful for this opportunity to learn more about these women. And we again thank you very much for providing this gift to us today.
I appreciate the opportunity. I also want to thank the invisible audience. Obviously, they paid attention without me knowing exactly who. At least now I know some of those who have asked questions, that they were with me during this time. I love doing this work. I feel a debt to these women because I have the ability to read the original and translate into English. So it's been my pleasure. Whatever I've done, I hope it will be of benefit to others.
Good. Thank you very much. One person just added a comment in chat. Applause, applause. And so I think you are now getting your round of applause from our virtual audience today. And I want to thank you again. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. And I hope you'll be able to join us next week when Anthony Vance talks about Louis Gregory and the history of African Americans involved in the law in the United States. So on that note, I want to thank everybody again and wish everyone a marvelous week. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.